Spring just be amazing. Amazing. do another sound check once you turn it back on?
I just told him I could just call and contact me and do a sound check. Make sure it's gonna work.
If they got to do an additional sound check once they turn it back on. So they got to do a different sound check. They let us know when they do the sound check.
Get Mr. Billy Turner into the courtroom, please, Deputy Phillips. Deputy Yancey, let everyone session. So those folks enter the courtroom now, please. Yes, sir. Ray Turner, good morning, sir. Have a seat, Mr. Turner. F. Smith. Yes, sir. Bring in the jury, please, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Can be seated. F. Smith. Someone needs a pen. Maybe one. Ladies and gentlemen, jury, good morning.
Good morning.
How's everyone doing?
Great.
Get any rest last night?
Yes.
Something, not much, not enough. I understand. How is the food? How are the accommodations?
Very good.
Are the deputies treating you reasonably well?
Yes.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, when we stopped last night, the state had indicated they had asked all the questions of Detective Browning, and there were a couple of omitted questions that Mr. Hagerman needs to ask before they submit Detective Browning for cross-examination. Detective Browning, where is he? Thought he was in the courtroom. Ask Jesse Browning to step back in the courtroom, please.
Yes, sir. Brown.
Brown, good morning, sir. You walked right up to where Deputy Smith is, as I told you yesterday, since this is a new day. Need to swear you in again, please, sir. Put your left hand on the Bible, raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you solemnly swear or affirm testimony you will give in this case be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you, sir. You put your hand down, have a seat here, please, and watch the step. Brown and Deputy Smith reminded me this morning that some of the jurors say that you are very soft-spoken, and they need to speak up just a little bit louder.
Okay, I'm going to try to talk it.
Yes, sir. Mr. Hagerman, you may proceed.
Mr. Brown, and after you testified yesterday, councils got together and there are some more records that we need into evidence through you.
Okay.
So can you look at this? We don't need you to read it, but if you can flip through this and ask you if you recognize this collection.
And yes, these are going to be the text messages from Sheriff Wright's phone. They were extracted.
You testified earlier that at some point in 2010, detectives searched Sheriff Wright's cell phone
That's correct.
and were able to obtain an extraction from the cell phone.
Yes.
And what are those things in front of you?
These are the text messages from that extraction.
So these are text messages from Sheriff Wright's phone in 2010.
Yes, they're put on an Excel sheet, so it's an actual extra report where you take just the text messages from that.
Your Honor, I'd have those introduced at this time.
Mr. Perry and/or Mr. Thomas, any objections?
No objection.
For the record, this is approximately a 13-page document described by Detective Browning as text messages that were extracted from the cell phone of Sheriff Wright. During the course of his investigation in 2010, a 13-page document, text messages from Ms. Sheriff Wright's phone. We proceed, Mr. Hagerman.
Detective, there's no need to review the entirety of this list presently, but I got you a couple questions, okay? When I'm looking at these text messages, there's a phone number that reads Edna J. Is that the contact name?
Correct.
And who was Edna J? Who is that person?
It's going to be Jimmy Martin.
Okay, so are there text exchanges from Jimmy Martin with Sheriff Wright in these documents?
There are.
Are there also text exchanges from Billy Ray Turner and Sheriff Wright in these documents?
Yes.
In particular, these text exchanges include the text message that we saw yesterday sent about 25 minutes before the murder from Sheriff Wright to Billy Turner.
Yes, it does.
Were Facebook records also obtained during the course of the original investigation?
Yes.
Facebook records with regard to Jimmy Martin?
Yes.
I have just a 3-page document. If you can look at this and tell me what I'm looking at.
These are going to be messages exchanged between Jimmy Martin and Sheriff Robinson. Sheriff Wright.
Sheriff Robinson, who's also Sheriff Wright, is that correct? And Jimmy Martin, who's also Jay Martin?
Correct.
Is that what's reflected on the Facebook records?
It is.
Your Honor, have that introduced as State 600.
Any objections, Mr. Thomas and/or Mr. Perry?
No, Your Honor.
Without objection, this is a 3-page document. Exhibit number 5959, identified by Detective Browning as Facebook messages between Sheriff Wright and Jay Martin. Sheriff Wright, Sheriff Robinson, also known as Sheriff Wright and Jay Martin, exhibit number 59, a 3-page document. You may proceed, Mr. Hagerman.
reviewing the document, I see that this Facebook exchange begins on June the 16th of 2010 and ends September the 9th of 2010. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
And I'm not going to ask you to attempt to decipher it, but have you read these Facebook messages?
Yes.
Do you believe that these conversations are in some type of rough or loose code?
Yes, it appears it would be.
Generally talking about what?
A party.
Can you
I'm
speak
sorry.
up for us?
A party.
A party.
It appears that Jimmy Martin and Shara Wright are attempting to get a party together.
Do you believe they're getting a party together?
I do not.
What do you believe the party is?
I believe that they were using that as code for the killing Lorenzen Wright.
Okay. So you believe this is a rough or loose coded conversation in which the killing of Lorenzen Wright is referred to as getting a party together?
Correct.
And there'll be another witness who goes through this line for line.
Okay.
Detective. Those were the documents that counsel talked about that wanted introduced to you, Detective Browning.
Okay.
There's a couple questions I forgot to ask you yesterday.
Okay.
You reviewed phone records from 2010, correct?
Yes.
Including phone records belonging to Billy Turner?
Yes.
Including his phone records from the night of the homicide, is that correct?
Yes.
Were there phone calls from Jimmy Martin to Billy Turner the night of the homicide?
There were.
Were there phone calls from Billy Turner to Jimmy Martin
Yes.
the night of the homicide?
Yes. There were.
So there was back and forth.
Correct.
Were there also phone numbers from another phone in Batesville, Mississippi to Billy Turner the night of the homicide?
Yes.
Was that phone number identified?
It was.
And what was it identified as?
A payphone in Batesville, Mississippi.
And where was this payphone in Batesville, Mississippi?
It was on 101 James Road, which is near Jimmy Martin's residence.
Did investigators actually go down there and look at the payphone?
They did.
Verify it was there?
Correct.
And you said it was near whose residence?
It was near Jimmy Martin.
Jimmy
in
Martin,
Batesville. Yes.
Who lived in Batesville?
Correct.
You testified earlier, this is another thing I forgot to ask you. You testified earlier that there was evidence in 2016 that Shara Wright would utilize other people's phones to make contact with Billy Turner. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was there also evidence in 2010, earlier, that Shara Wright would use other phones to contact or be contacted by Billy Turner?
Yes.
In fact, did you review Billy Turner's phone records? You've already testified you did. You reviewed his phone records from the night of the homicide and the morning after the homicide?
That's correct.
Was there evidence of a phone call from Billy Turner to a phone other than Shara Wright's that you believe Shara Wright was using?
Yes.
And what was that from?
That would have been Lorenzen Jr.'s phone.
The kid?
Yes, her child.
The 14, 15-year-old?
15-year-old, yes.
And who contacted whom?
It appeared to be a back and forth after the homicide.
Okay, is this the morning after the homicide?
Yes.
Back and forth between Billy Turner and
Lorenzen
Wright
Jr.'s cellular
Jr.'s
phone.
Snoop's cell phone.
That's correct.
That's all my question.
Hagerman. Mr. Thomas, you may proceed.
Good morning, Detective Browning.
Good morning.
Detective Browning, at what point during this investigation did you join it?
It was 2016.
2016. Did this investigation have a name?
Yes.
What was the name of the investigation?
Operation Rebound.
And during Operation Rebound, please explain what your role was.
My role was to kind of keep hold of all the evidence that we were getting and collecting, review the records, the statements. Even though we had a team that was doing that too, I was also kind of keeping charge of like all the paperwork, trying to keep everything together.
Were you privy to all aspects of Operation Rebound?
Yes.
So there was nothing associated with Operation Rebound that you didn't know about. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would know about it.
Let me ask you, Mr. Hagerman, from yesterday till today, asked you to identify a number of pieces of evidence, photos, and the like. Let me ask you about 452 Teoram Lane. Who lived at 452 Teoram Lane in 2010?
It was Lorenzen Wright, I think Jeremy Orange, and yet another roommate. I forget his name.
Did you ever personally go to 452 Teoram Lane?
I did not.
So the photos that were introduced into evidence of 452 Teoram, you didn't personally take those photos, did you?
I did not.
Do you know who took those photos?
I do not.
On exhibit number 7 was a diagram. I'm sorry. Exhibit number 3. Pass this.
Yes, sir, ma'am.
Exhibit number 3, that's a overview of a Google Maps of 452 Teoram Lane and an IHOP. Is there any particular reason why an IHOP is highlighted in that particular street overview?
I do not know. I would only assume that it has to do with, I know that in Jimmy's statement, he makes a statement about an IHOP that they were at or something. But other than that, I do not know.
Do you happen to know back in 2010 if Lorenzen Wright had a alarm system at his home at 452 Teoram?
I do not.
Let me ask you about 4530 Whispering Woods. Who lived at that address in 2010?
Shara Wright?
Do you know if Lorenzen Wright ever lived at that address?
I do not. I know that he frequented there, but I do not know if he actually lived there.
Do you know how long Shara Wright actually lived at that address?
No, I do not.
Do you know where Shara Wright and Lorenzen Wright lived prior to Shara moving to 4530 Whispering Woods?
I don't remember it, but I do remember it being somewhere in Eads, Tennessee, I think.
Have you ever personally been there?
I have not.
And so you didn't take the photos that were entered into evidence of that address as well either, did you?
Correct, I did not.
You also entered different shell casings associated with the Callis cutoff location where Lorenzen Wright's body was located, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know exactly how many of the 25 shell casings were collected out there?
What do you mean by collected?
The spent shell casings, were there any 25 spent shell casings collected on the scene out there?
Yes.
Do you know how many?
I don't remember now. Whatever was on the graph, I can't remember.
Would it help if you had exhibit 15?
Yes, that would be.
Exhibit 15 is Brown.
Yes, sir. Sure.
Five.
You 5?
Yes, sir.
Now, I'd like to ask you about the text message that you were asked about on yesterday. I believe that would be the text message between Shaw Wright, that was Exhibit 44, the text message between Shaw and Billy Turner. I'm sorry, Exhibit 43. Let me, do you know the context of that text message?
No.
Lorenzen Wright was a favorite son of the city, played high school ball, college ball. He raised a family here, correct?
Yes.
So it stands to reason that he knew a lot of people who lived in this city, correct?
Yes.
So read that text message to me once again.
I'm gonna need my commission. Ren want you to bring your cards in the AM before you fly out. You owe me, boy.
So isn't it true that he could possibly, Ren could be one of these business cards to give to people who he knows in this city, correct?
Yes, I mean, it could be possible, yes.
There is nothing in that text message between Shaw Wright and Billy Turner that sets up any kind of murder or killing of Lorenzen Wright, is there?
On the surface, no.
On the surface. Read the text message again.
I'm gonna need my commission. Ren want you to bring your cards in the AM before you fly out. You owe me, boy.
Who sent the text to who?
Share it, Billy.
Share to Billy. And in that text message, it doesn't say, I'm gonna need you to murder Lorenzen Wright, does it?
It does not.
It asks about business cards that Ren wants from Billy Turner,
Correct.
which you've already said that Billy Turner was a yard man at that time, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Through your investigation, were you ever able to uncover $50,000 in Mr. Turner's bank account?
I was not.
What about $25,000?
I was not.
Okay. So, was Billy, to the best of your knowledge, was Billy Turner the beneficiary of a $1 million life insurance policy from Lorenzen Wright?
Not $1 million policy, no.
Was Billy Turner the beneficiary of Lorenzen Wright's NBA pension?
He was not.
So, through your investigation, there was no money given from Shaw Wright to Billy Turner, correct?
It didn't appear that he got cash for what he did. Yes.
Those text messages that Mr. Hagerman just asked you about that was just entered into evidence, are those all the text messages from Shaw Wright, or are those just the relevant text messages that Operation Rebound found relevant?
I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure those are like the complete, because if you see in there, there's other individuals that she's communicating with, and if you see the highlighted part, the highlighted part was not significant to its importance. It was just to organize who was who so that you didn't have to keep looking at each individual name.
After, you stated yesterday in your direct with Mr. Hagerman that Operation Rebound leaked to the media that a gun was recovered in a body of water in Mississippi, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And at that point, you had Shar phones tapped and she came to Memphis, correct?
That's correct.
You stated that she met with Billy Turner when she came to Memphis, correct?
Yes.
But that's not all who she met with during that time, is it?
No, that's not.
Matter of fact, she met with a number of people, didn't she?
She met with several people, yes.
She met with her ex-husband,
Yes.
correct? She met with several other friends, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So, to characterize her visit as solely coming to see Billy Turner, that wouldn't be correct at all, would it?
Can you say that again?
To characterize that once Operation Rebound leaked that a gun was found in the body of water and she immediately came to Memphis to meet with Billy Turner, that's not an accurate depiction, is it?
I would say it was the only person that she met in secret, where it was done through a second like a second party. She called her ex-husband, and she called her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend Kelvin. I don't know if they were married. So those were open conversations where she wasn't hiding those meetings.
But she met with a number of people.
She did meet with them.
Detective Browning, during Operation Rebound, you would meet sometimes with Claudia Robinson, or investigators would meet with Claudia Robinson to exchange recording devices that she used to record her conversations with Shar Wright. Do you have a copy of the script that you provided for her to follow during those conversations?
So I wasn't directly involved in that. I knew about it, and I knew that it was being conducted, but at the same time, I was doing 10-day reports and trying to manage the wire aspect. So even though I know what's going on, we're talking about it, how they went about it, or if they did it verbally, or if they gave her transcripts, I do not know. I didn't see transcripts in the case file, so I would have to assume that they were directing her or talking to her about it.
So, to the best of your knowledge, in which you told me earlier that you were privy to all aspects of Operation Rebound, there was no script, correct?
Well, I'm going to assume that they're guiding her because they're giving her a recorder and they're asking her to make these phone calls. So they're guiding her through that, yes.
So, do you have a copy of a script? That's what I'm asking.
Yes, I do not. I do not have a copy of the script.
Yeah, if I got one more.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, sir. I apologize.
One other question. I want to go back. When Sheriff, after the media had leaked, after Operation Rebound had leaked to the media that a gun was found in the body of water, I asked you about who Sheriff came to visit and spoke with. During that time, it wasn't Billy Turner who was trying to contact Shara. Shara was the one who was contacting Billy, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And were you able to see the text messages or that Shara sent to Billy during that time?
Through the
Yes.
third party?
Through the third party.
Yes.
To the best of your recollection, did Billy even recognize who this was who was trying to contact him?
I don't think at first, no.
He did. No other questions, John.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Hagerman, you have any additional questions of Detective Browning?
No, sir.
Deputy Smith, can you please give to Detective Browning Exhibit 58, please? You're gonna need this for this question from the jury, okay? I know Mr. Hagerman told you he did not want you to publish or go through all the text messages that were sent or exchanged from Shara Wright. But the question from the jury, I'm gonna read exactly as it's written. Quote, who else did Shara or Billy text the night of the murder, question mark, besides Jimmy, question mark, in parentheses, calls after 10 p.m. or text, question mark, close parentheses. Now, if you can answer that question, I'll ask Deputy Smith to give you that information because it might assist you in that answer. But if you can answer that question, you can answer it for the jury, please, sir.
So I can tell you, yes, there were other, I do remember, there were other communications with other individuals. I know of one particular was of Billy Turner. Of course, you can't tell if they communicated, but there was a transaction between him and what appeared to be his girlfriend at the time, or a girl. Shara's text messages were pretty limited right after the homicide for a brief period. I think the next one that I saw was probably at 1 in the morning. I don't know if it was that night or the following night. I'd have to see, but it was between her and Billy. Which would have been. And she also was sending outgoing text messages to Lorenzen himself. So yes, there was other communications with other individuals. I don't know if that answered the question.
We'll see in a minute. Ms. Hagerman, any additional questions?
Well, I don't think it totally answered the question that the juror had. I think the juror question was, after about 10 p.m. the night of the homicide, let's take Shara first.
Okay.
Was Shara texting people other than Jimmy Martin and Billy Turner?
No, she didn't text Jimmy, and then the only text was with Billy Turner. I think that was at that time period, right before, like 25 minutes before the murder.
Okay, was she placing or receiving phone calls from anybody other than Jimmy Martin or Billy Turner?
No.
Okay, so if you look at those records in front of you, does she have any texts or any phone calls with anybody else, let's say from 10 p.m. that night of the murder till 8 a.m. that next morning? Texts or calls with other friends or anybody else that's identified? I'm sorry about talking about the 10 o'clock on the 18th going to about 8 in the morning on the 19th.
Yeah, I'm making sure that these are in order. So it appears no. So, of course, you saw or you heard where she sends the text to Billy Turner about the commission, and then after that, Billy sends a response, which is okay. The next text that she sends is to Lorenzen, which is a text saying, "I'm not tripping, but the kids waited for you all day. Junkie was here looking for you," and it would be Cordell, I'm not sure what she was trying to say here, to tell somebody something. Maybe she meant cordial. And I know Junkie to be the alias for Jeremy Orange, which is who was picking up Lorenzen in the morning.
Lorenzen's friend who was picking up him and the kids?
Correct.
Text, what time would she have sent this text?
She sent this text at 1:27 a.m.
On what day?
on the 20th.
So we're past the 19th.
Yes, that's the next one after.
Okay, so is that the next text that she sends after the commission text to Billy Turner?
Correct.
So no text for an entire day.
Correct.
Do you remember, the question wasn't just about text, I think. Do you remember whether or not Shara was making phone calls after about 10 o'clock the night of the murder into the next day?
I think that she didn't have any communication until the morning.
Okay, the next morning?
Correct.
Okay. And was it that next morning that you saw the communications between Billy Turner and the phone belonging to the 14-year-old Snoop?
Yes, Lorenzen Jr., yes.
And then I think the question also was about Billy Turner. After about 10 o'clock at night, from the phone records, was Billy Turner communicating with anybody other than Shara Wright or Jimmy Martin?
I know he was communicating with I think it was his girlfriend.
Okay, and is her name reflected in the line sheets that you have?
No, this is going to be just with Shara. It's just text
Those are
messages.
just
There's no
Shara's
call
phone
logs or anything.
Okay. So you know that Mr. Turner was communicating? at
I
least
do
with his
remember him
girlfriend?
communicating with her, but I'm not sure who else. I'd have to see the actual records.
Okay. And I don't, this may help. There's a phone expert coming in today who has all the records that were obtained in 2010.
Yes.
And I'll remember that question for when he testifies, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
That's all my questions I think, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Hagerman. Mr. Thomas, any additional questions?
Just,
Yes, sir.
the call that was from Snoop, the son of Shara and Lorenzen, that was a call from Snoop to Billy Turner. Billy Turner didn't initiate the conversation, correct?
I would have to look at the records. I know it's been a while, but it was a back and forth. So I think it started around 6 in the morning, but I'm not sure. But I know that there is a back and forth that starts up between his cellular phone and Lorenzen Jr.'s cellular phone. Who initiated, I do not remember.
Just 1 second.
Yes, sir.
That's it. That's all we got.
Ms. Hagerman, any additional questions?
Oh, no further questions. I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Yes, sir. Detective Browning, I'm going to excuse you from any additional testimony in this case. You cannot discuss your testimony with anyone or allow anyone to talk to you about their testimony. Thank you for being present in court yesterday and today. And make sure you stay safe, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, sir. Sit down and watch your steps, please. Counsel, approach, please.
Your Honor, Steve call Servinia Braswell.
Servinia Braswell, please. Special Agent Braswell, good morning.
Morning.
come to where Deputy Smith is standing, please. You have something in your left hand. You hand it to Deputy Smith for a moment. Put your left hand on the Bible. Raise your right hand to be sworn. You can hand that to Deputy Smith also. He'll hold it back for you. You got it? He'll hold it for you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you will give in this case be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you, ma'am. You have the bottom back. Have a seat here. Watch your step. How are you doing this morning?
Good.
Good to see you again.
You too.
Mr. Schofield, you may proceed, sir.
Thank you. And Mr. Braswell, usually the judge will tell you this, but if you're more comfortable with your mask off, you can
I
take it off.
apologize. I should have told you that. If you want to take the mask off, you may certainly take it off. Thank you, ma'am.
Sorry, Judge, I wasn't trying to jump ahead.
No, you're fine. I was writing up. Forgot to look up and see if she had a mask on. You may proceed, Ms. Schofield.
Thank you, Judge. Ms. Braswell, can you state and spell your name for the jury and for the court reporter, please?
Servinia Braswell, CerviniaBraswell.
And where are you employed?
I'm employed by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation.
And how long have you been employed then?
17 years.
And what do you do for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation?
I'm a special agent assigned to the training unit. Prior to that, I worked for 15 years as a special agent forensic scientist in the firearms identification unit.
And firearms identification, how long did you do that? 15 years, you said?
Yes.
Okay. And if you could explain to the jury what exactly firearms identification is?
That's examining firearms to make sure they work properly, looking at bullets and cartridge cases to determine if they were fired from a specific gun or fired in the same gun.
And what kind of training did you have to go through to get that job?
I have a 2-year on-the-job training program involving the microscopic examination of over 1,000 fired bullets, cartridge cases, shot shells, and other ammunition components to determine the specific firearm that they were fired in, as well as examining firearms to determine if they were functioning properly. I trained under 7 court-qualified firearms examiners with over 100 years of combined experience. As part of that training, I toured many of the firearm manufacturing plants located throughout the Northeast United States, as well as the Remington and Winchester ammunition plants. This allowed me to see firsthand how those manufacturers tool and machine their products and what marks those machining processes leave on the fired ammunition components as well as those firearms.
And could you even, well, I guess give us a ballpark figure for how many firearms or shell casings you've examined?
Well over, I'd say, 20,000 all together.
Okay. And have you ever testified as an expert in firearms identification before?
I have.
Could you give us an estimate of how many times that's been?
142.
So an exact number, 142. A lot of them probably right here in this building, right?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to tender Agent Braswell as an expert in firearms identification.
Ms. Perry, Mr. Thomas, any objections to the tender of Special Agent Braswell as an expert in her field or any questions regarding her qualifications?
No objection, Your Honor. No board diary.
Ms. Perry. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, I'm going to declare to you that Special Agent Servinia Braswell is an expert in her field, which is firearms identification. Normally, a person testifying in court can only testify in the form of factual and give you factual answers. A person qualified or declared to be an expert based on a person's training, education, background, experience, can give you testimony in a form of opinions and give you reasons for those opinions, and the court, in fact, will declare Special Agent Braswell an expert in her field of firearms identification and should be able to provide to you opinion testimony. You may proceed, Mr. Schofield.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Braswell, could you explain to the jury exactly how you go about doing your firearms identification?
Yes. Can I step down?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am.
So every firearm has its own unique markings, and these marks are primarily the result of the manufacturing process. So things such as the changing of the surface of the tool being used to make the firearm, any chatter or vibrations of those tools, in addition to use, misuse, corrosion, rust, even cleaning the firearm adds to the uniqueness of these marks. These are what we call individual characteristics or the gun's mechanical fingerprint. They're unique to a particular firearm. When the barrel of a firearm is made, it's receives or is manufactured rifling in it. And the rifling, the purpose of that is to force the bullet to spin as it exits the barrel, and that's for accuracy purposes. So it's like a quarterback throwing a football. You want it to spiral out of his hand so it'll hit its intended receiver. The manufacturer will determine how many lands and grooves they cut to the firearm, the direction of the twist of those lands and grooves, and the width of those lands and grooves. They also determine things such as the shape of the firing pin. Is it round? Is it rectangular? Those are what we call class characteristics, and they're common to a group of firearms. So an everyday example would be if I walked out into a parking garage and I was trying to find my red Jeep Wrangler. Everything that's not a red Jeep Wrangler we could exclude based on class characteristics. Now I'm looking for individual characteristics. So what makes it my Jeep Wrangler? There's my plate number, there's my vehicle identification number, there's scratches I know I put on the door of that vehicle, and there's my sunglasses sitting on the dash. So that is individual to me. So there's several things that happen in a firearm during the firing process. Part of that is a cartridge. They're loaded into the magazine of the gun of a semi-automatic pistol. That magazine is inserted into the grip area of the firearm. The slide, or the top portion of that gun, is pulled to the rear and released. As it moves forward, it takes this top cartridge and pushes it into the chamber of the gun. Now when the trigger is pulled, the firing pin moves forward and it strikes the back area of the cartridge case that's known as the primer. That creates a spark, and that spark lights the gunpowder that's inside the cartridge. So when enough pressure builds up, it forces that bullet out and down the barrel and out of the gun. So as that bullet travels down that barrel, that gun's individual characteristics or mechanical fingerprint is scraped along the surface area of the bullet. And those marks are what we look at under a comparison microscope to determine if two bullets were fired from the same firearm. That same pressure takes this cartridge case and slams it back up against what we call the breech face of the firearm. And that's the thick block of metal that surrounds the firing pin. That pressure causes that slide to move rearward, and the extractor holds this cartridge case in place. So it moves all the way to the rear until the cartridge case comes in contact with the ejector, which kicks the cartridge case out of the gun. That's why on scenes you often find fired cartridge cases at the scene. And again, those are the marks left by the breech face and the firing pin that we look at on the back of the cartridge case under the microscope to determine if two cartridge cases were fired from the same firearm. So I can compare bullets to bullets and cartridge cases to cartridge cases, but not bullets to cartridge cases because they're marked by two totally different parts of the firearm.
Schofield, you proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. And as a part of that, you can match casings to casings to bullets, but can you also match casings to a gun and a bullet to a gun?
Yes. And we do that by test firing the gun that gives us fired bullets that we know came from that particular gun, fired cartridge cases that we know came from that particular gun, and have that gun's mechanical fingerprint present. And we compare those to any evidence bullets in cartridge cases to see if that fingerprint is present there as well.
Now, for this particular case, 10070155548, I believe your lab number is 103004886. Did you examine some bullets and shell casings in a firearm for this particular case?
I did.
I'm going to pass forward what's been previously marked as exhibit number 57 and ask you if you recognize this.
I do. It's got a barcode that was generated by our laboratory. It's got our unique laboratory case number, an exhibit number on it. It's got the date and my initials when I opened the package. It's got my seal and the evidence tape and my initials where I sealed the package when I was done with my examination.
Okay. And if you could just open that and confirm it is the 9mm pistol you examined.
It is.
All right. And Now, did this particular weapon, this particular case, present some unusual factors for you?
It did.
And could you tell the jury about that?
The firearm came in water, and the firearm was covered in dirt and black sludge type material. So before I could test fire the gun, or before it would even function properly, I had to soak the gun in what we call penophyte. It's a chemical that removes a lot of the corrosion and things present on the firearm. And then after I was able to move the slide and get the parts to function a little bit, I took the gun apart and soaked each of the parts in the same type of solution. And I was able to clean the gun up so I could test fire the gun or attempt to.
Because would it be safe to say that a gun that had been sitting in a lake for 6 years would be in some pretty rough condition?
Yes.
And does your cleaning the gun or any of that affect the grooves in the barrel or the breech where marks are made on the shell casing?
No, it did not.
Okay. So once you were able to clean the gun up and get the gunk and rust and stuff off it, were you able to test fire the gun?
I wasn't able to test fire it in its condition because there were 2 parts inside the gun that were broken. There was a sear spring inside the gun that was broken and an ejector spring. The sear spring kept the gun from the hammer from cocking and being able to fire. So what I did is take the slide, the top portion, which with that comes the barrel and the breech face. So everything that I would look at under the microscope on test fire bullets and cartridge cases, I was able to remove that and put it on a reference frame that we have in our vault. So those are guns that we use. In this case, if a gun comes in that's not working, we can use parts from that gun to be able to test fire it. So that's what I did in this case to get test fired bullets and cartridge cases.
Okay. Were you able to do that in this case?
I was.
I'll pass you forward what's been previously marked as exhibits number 35, 33, and oh yeah, I'm gonna add previously marked number 34. Do you recognize that?
I do. It's got my same identifying marks.
And what's contained in that envelope?
This contains 9 9mm cartridge cases.
Okay. And did you examine those cartridge casings?
I did.
And did you compare them to the cartridge casing you test fired in that pistol up there?
I did.
And what did you discover?
I determined that these 9 cartridge cases were fired from that pistol.
Okay. Also going to pass forward with some previously marked as exhibit 33. Do you recognize that exhibit?
I do. It has my same identifying marks.
Okay, and did you, now that has some different, they're not all 9mm shell casings, right?
Correct.
Is there one 9mm shell casing that isn't there?
Yes,
Did that also in fact match that pistol?
it did.
And what are the other shell casings you examined?
There is a 380 auto caliber cartridge case and 5 25 auto caliber cartridge cases, or a metric 6.35.
Okay, and obviously those 25 caliber cartridge casings, do those go to that gun?
No, they did not.
It's a different caliber pistol.
Yes.
Yeah, but did those 5 cartridge casings, did you compare those casings?
Yes, I compared those to each other, and they were all fired from the same unidentified firearm.
Also pass up 3, what's been previously marked as exhibit number 35. Did you examine those items as well?
I did.
And what are those?
There's 2 jacketed hollow point bullet jackets and 1 jacketed hollow point bullet.
And did you examine those, and what did you discover when you examined them?
I did. Determined that one of these had the same class characteristics, yet the individual characteristics were insufficient for a more conclusive identification. And I determined that 2 of these had been fired from that particular gun.
From the 9mm?
Yes.
Okay. And then I will pass up exhibits number 36, 37, and 38. Did you also examine those fragments or bullet fragments that came from the medical examiner's office?
I did, and they have my same identifying marks.
And what did you discover with those?
There was one from the right arm that had no marks of comparison value. And what that means is when a bullet strikes something, whether it be an object or a person, a lot of times that bullet will break apart. And depending on where that bullet breaks apart, it may not touch the actual barrel of the bullet. So for example, if this bullet impacted something and the top broke apart, the top never came in contact with the rifle. So it's not going to have any marks for me to look at. There are 2 .25 auto caliber bullets, and I determined that they had been fired from the same unknown firearm. And there's a bullet jacket that was recovered from the head, and it was determined that it too bear the same class characteristics, yet insufficient characteristics, individual characteristics, when compared to that firearm.
So the 9mm firearm.
Yes.
So, per your example, it's a Jeep Wrangler, but we can't exactly tell if it's yours.
Right. And a lot of that, or some of that, could be attributed to these bullets sat out in, for better terms, decomposing tissues and fluids for a while, and that can cause problems when looking at them later.
And so when we're talking about the 9-bullet casings, those are from the callus cutoff area, correct?
Yes.
The 9mm 9-bullet casing.
Yes.
And then we have a separate 380, 25 caliber, and 1 9mm bullet that are also from the callus cutoff area.
Yes.
Okay. And the bullets we're talking about that were, I mentioned, from the medical examiner's office that was found in his head and his body, those would be bullets actually physically recovered from Lorenzen Wright's body.
Yes.
And then we had 2 additional ones you said were from the match the gun, and one that had the same class characteristics, also from callus cutoff.
3, but yes.
3. But 2 you could match, 1 you could say it was just the same class characteristic.
Yes.
Okay. So all the 9mm casings, the ones found by the body and the ones found out by the street, all 9mm casings match that gun.
Yes.
Thank you. No questions, Mr. Thomas? Thank you, sir. Special Lady Braswell, thank you for being present in court today. I'm going to excuse you for any additional testimony. Make sure you stay safe.
Yes,
Thank you.
sir.
It's good to see you again. Yes, ma'am. Take your time gathering up all your belongings. Thank you, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe the state's next witness will be Dr. Marco Ross. Is that correct?
Sir.
Shelby County Chief Medical Examiner. And his testimony might take a little bit. So instead of starting the testimony and having to take a recess, we'll take a break for right now. Remember, court's instruction, cannot discuss the case with anyone or amongst yourselves. And we'll start with Dr. Ross in a few minutes. You can follow Deputy Smith, please. Thank you. For the record, the jurors out. Is there anything else we need to discuss or address before we take a recess? May call the court into recess. Everyone can remain seated.
What's that, the recess?
Deputy Phillips.
for 15 years now.
And did you have to have any kind of special training or education to get that job?
Yes, prior to coming here, I graduated from Tulane Medical School in 1985, completed a residency in general surgery at the University of South Carolina in 1991, served as a general surgeon in the U.S. Navy from 91 to 95, then completed a residency in anatomic and clinical pathology at the University of Vermont in 1999, and a forensic pathology fellowship at the University of North Carolina in 2000. Following that, I served as a medical examiner in Phoenix, Arizona for approximately 2.5 years, then in Spokane, Washington for approximately 4.5 years before coming to Memphis.
And since you've been in Memphis, I think you said 15 years?
Yes,
And you've been chief medical examiner how long?
for about a year and a half now.
And have you testified as an expert in forensic pathology before?
Yes, I have,
How many times?
numerous times.
In this building?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this point, I'd like to tender him as an expert in forensic pathology.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Thomas, any objections to the tender? Dr. Ross is an expert in this field, or any questions or Vordire regarding his qualifications?
No objection, no vote aye.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, the court is going to declare Dr. Marco Ross is an expert in this field of forensic pathology. As it indicated earlier, a person qualifies as an expert because of special skill, training, education, background, can in fact testify in the form of opinions and give you reasons for those opinions. And Dr. Ross will be able to testify in those opinion forms and give you background or reasons for those opinions, as the court has declared that he is in fact an expert in his field of forensic pathology. Mr. Schofield, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. As a part of your duties with the medical examiner's office, did you perform the autopsy on Lorenzen Wright?
Yes, I did.
Was this your typical kind of autopsy, or were there some challenges you don't usually see?
This was unusual and different in that the remains were so decomposed.
Okay, so the remains were very decomposed.
Yes.
Would this be typical of what you see a body being out in the exposed to the elements in July in Memphis?
Certainly, in a situation like that, bodies that remain outdoors for a week or longer can experience quite severe stages of decomposition and partial skeletonization, as occurred in this case.
Okay. And did you have to do anything special or out of the ordinary when you were conducting this particular autopsy?
Well, in addition to making sure that we positively identified the remains, which was done by a dental odontologic examination, we also had to evaluate both by a relatively normal autopsy approach, which includes an examination of the body and all of its surfaces and contents. But in addition, in a case like this, we will usually try to remove remaining tissue on the bones if it's mostly skeletonized, as it was in this case, to evaluate the skeletal remains for evidence of a trauma, since the soft tissue evidence for potential trauma or disease is missing.
Okay. So you may have some soft tissue you can still examine, you may not, and that's why you have to take the further steps.
Yes.
And you also do x-rays of the body?
Yes.
Okay. And you did all these things in this case?
Yes, it did.
Did you, what defects did you note from the beginning or that caught your eye?
Initially, we noticed some defects of the remaining skin that was still attached to the skull, one of which, at least one of which corresponded to an actual defect in the skull, which we subsequently identified as a gunshot entrance wound. There were other defects of the scalp tissue that were related to underlying fractures of the skull as well.
Is it common when a skull is hit by a bullet that the skull will fracture in place?
Yes.
Because that's a high velocity projectile.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. I'm going to pass forward some pictures and ask you to recognize these pictures. Your Honor, I've already shown these to defense counsel. I don't believe there's any objections.
Yes, sir.
No objection.
Mr. Thomas, thank you, sir.
If you could take a look at those pictures and describe them for us one by one, Doctor, and I'll leave those into evidence, and then we'll talk about it.
We have a photograph of the upper half of the decomposed remains as we initially received them in the forensic center, or at least after we had removed the clothing. And then the second photograph shows a close-up of the head, showing some of the defects in the remaining scalp tissue on the skull. The third photograph shows the skull itself after the tissues and the skin have been removed from the skull in order to evaluate the injuries of the skull much more clearly. This one shows the left side of the skull. The next photograph shows the right side of the skull with a defect corresponding to a gunshot exit wound. The next photograph shows the underside or the bottom of the skull, showing a defect behind the area of the left ear. The next photograph shows a close-up of some of the decomposed tissue inside the chest cavity area where a bullet is located within that tissue. The next photograph is an x-ray taken at the time of autopsy. It's x-ray showing mainly some of the chest and shoulder area and showing the presence of 2 bullets in the chest region. The next photograph shows bullet fragments that were removed from the decedent's right arm. The next one shows, it's a photograph showing the bullets that were removed from the chest. And the next one is a photograph showing a bullet fragment or bullet jacket from inside the head of the deceased.
Now, at this time, I'd like to admit those pictures into evidence.
Without objection, the court will admit as exhibit number 60. Photograph described by Dr. Ross as photograph of the upper half of the body of Lorenzen Wright, showing certain decomposure. Exhibit 60. Decomposing remains, I believe is the word that Dr. Ross used. Decomposed remains. Exhibit number 61. The photograph described by Dr. Ross as showing a close-up of the head skull area. Exhibit number 61. Exhibit number 62. Photograph of what is described by Dr. Ross of the skull after tissue and skin had been removed. Exhibit number 62. Exhibit number 63 is a photograph described by Dr. Ross as showing the left side of the skull. Exhibit 63. Exhibit 64, photograph described by Dr. Ross as showing the right side of the skull. Possible exit wound. Exhibit 64. Exhibit number 65 is photograph described by Dr. Ross as showing the bottom of the skull. Did I have the 2 pictures there, please, Smith? picture here, sir?
That's a photograph of the inside of the chest cavity area, showing some decomposed tissue and the bullet located in that tissue.
Yes, sir. Exhibit number 65. I think I got it in order. Rephrase this for the record. Exhibit number 65 is a close-up of the chest area showing decomposed tissue with possible bullet fragments. That is exhibit number 65. Yes, sir.
Originally, I think you said 65 was the photo at the bottom of the skull. Are you?
Yes, sir, I may have misspoken. That's why I asked Dr. Ross for clarification. And what Dr. Ross has told us is the close-up area decomposed tissue of the chest with a possible bullet fragment. So that is 65. So I had it properly labeled, but I just did not describe it correctly. Exhibit 66. This photograph described by Dr. Ross is an X-ray of the chest area, exhibit 66. Exhibit 67. Photograph showing bullet fragments from the right arm. Exhibit 67. Exhibit 68. Photographs described by Dr. Ross is showing bullets that were taken from the chest of the body of Lorenzen Wright. Exhibit 68, bullets from the chest. Exhibit number 69, photographs showing what's been described by Dr. Ross's bullet jacket from head. Exhibit 69, bullet fragments from the head or jackets from the head. Mr. Schofield, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. And, Your Honor, due to our inability to get the digital laser pointer to work, would it be all right if I had Dr. Ross step down and publish these to the jury so he can point out what we need to be looking at?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Ross, would you be comfortable with that? Sure.
Step down from the witness stand, please, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, jury, we have some issues with this system. As I said, it's a brand new system that we started using about 3 or 4 months ago, and apparently it's not working properly right now. So Dr. Ross is going to stand down in front of you and in front of the jury box to explain to you what has been shown in these photographs. If you need to move, please feel free to move closer where Dr. Ross is. Some of these pictures may be a little bit unpleasant. I'll give you a heads up on that. But if you need to move to see the photographs, please feel free to move. Mr. Schofield, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to pass Dr. Ross previously marked as exhibit number 16. Dr. Ross, could you show that to the jury and explain to them what was significant about that picture?
This is a photograph showing the upper half of the remains of Mr. Wright after we had removed the clothing. And in it you can see mainly the skull, what's left of the skull on the top of the photograph, and then the chest and shoulder region are going to be in the lower portion of the photograph.
Right. And I know you described doing skeletal analysis, but it was true you were able to find some defects in the soft tissue.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm going to pass forward what's been previously marked as exhibit number 61. If you could explain to the jury what you photographed in that picture, Doctor.
This is a close-up of the previous photograph, and mainly in this area here that's kind of bordered by the ruler, you can see some defects in the decomposed scalp tissue that is still adherent to the skull in that area. And one of those defects does correspond to a defect that we found in the skull itself that is a gunshot entrance wound, and the other defects correspond to fracture sites that were present in the skull as well.
So let me say this also, if you want to use that projector, if it's set up to be used, we can use it also.
It's
Not set up, yes, sir.
Sorry, it occurred to us right as we were to start with that.
Yes, sir.
Mark. And so I believe you testified at some point you removed the remaining soft tissue so you could examine the skeleton.
Yes.
I'm going to pass forward to the marked as exhibit number 62. Could you explain to the jury what this is a picture of?
Okay. This is a photograph showing the left side of the skull after the skin and soft tissues has been removed, and you'll notice a defect towards the front part of the skull. That defect there is a gunshot entrance wound on the left frontoparietal skull, is how that's described. In addition to that defect there, you notice towards the front area of the skull here, although you're seeing it from the side, a lot of the bones that would be present around the eyes and the nose are missing as well, because those have been fractured, and much of that bone is missing from the front part of the skull as well.
Pass Dr. Ross, was this previously marked as exhibit number 63? Dr. Ross, could you tell the jury about that picture, please?
Okay, this is a photograph showing the right side of the skull after the tissues and skin have been removed, and you'll see my finger is going to be right next to a defect that's sort of in the right temporal area of the skull, and that defect there is a gunshot exit wound on the skull.
Pass what's been previously marked as exhibit number 64.
This is a photograph of the base of the skull. So what we're doing is that we're actually kind of looking up at the bottom of the skull after, again, the tissues have been removed. And what you'll see is it's sort of the bottom left side of the skull. So the back of the skull is towards the top of the diagram. The front of the skull would be towards the bottom of the picture. This dark defect here on the edge is the foramen magnum. That's the part of the skull that sits on top of the spine. And then the area over here where this defect is, that's a defect that's just behind the mastoid process. The mastoid process, if you feel your ear, there's kind of a bony ridge just behind the ear. That's the mastoid process. And this defect right there is present just behind that mastoid process. That is another gunshot entrance wound. So that's a gunshot entrance wound, again, located on the left side of the skull, just behind the left ear. And that is an entrance wound that likely corresponds to the exit wound on the right side of the skull. The entrance wound I showed you previously in the left frontal part of the skull probably corresponds to the defect that we sort of see in the front of the skull.
Pass what's been previously marked as exhibit number 65.
This is a photograph showing the inside of the chest, and the all that gray-brown tissue that you see in there is just decomposed soft tissue inside the chest cavity. And within that decomposed tissue, just above the ruler, you'll see a little, I'll put my finger next to it, there is a bullet sitting within that tissue inside the chest.
That's the doctor previously marked exhibit number 66.
Okay, this is a photograph of an x-ray taken at the time of autopsy. Of course, because of the decomposed situation of the remains and the fact that the supporting soft tissue structure is no longer there. This does not look like your typical chest x-ray that you see in a more intact individual. But what you'll see in this x-ray is over towards the left side, you'll see, or rather the right side of the photograph, you'll see the spine. So this area here is the spine. This area here is actually just the shoulder. This would be his right shoulder that's just kind of off to the side because there's no longer any tissue supporting it. And then you can see all of the ribs that are in here. And again, I'll put my finger by one of them, but there are actually two whitish objects that you can see in the chest, and those are the bullets that are showing up on the x-ray. My finger is next to one of them. See the two bullets inside the chest cavity on this x-ray.
The last three is number 67, 68, and 69. If you could tell the jury what those items are.
This one is just a photograph showing some of the bullet fragments that we removed from his right arm. We did find in the right forearm area, just above the wrist area, there was a defect in the radius bone in that arm, and there's still some residual soft tissue in there, and we removed these bullet fragments from the soft tissue around the defect in that arm. So that corresponds to a gunshot wound to his right forearm. The next photograph shows the two bullets that we actually removed from the chest. So those were the two bullets that you saw on the x-ray, and also one of the bullets that you saw in that other photograph showing the decomposed chest tissue. So those were two bullets that we removed from the chest cavity. And we did find corresponding defects in the right collarbone, as well as in the right second rib, the left fourth rib, and the left eighth rib, that all had defects consistent with a gunshot wound. So at least some of those probably corresponded to those bullets. And the last photograph shows a bullet jacket, which is the sort of the metal covering on the surface of the bullet, and that was what was still remaining inside the skull at the time of autopsy. The rest of the bullet was no longer there. So this probably is one of those gunshot wounds that are in the head. What happens is the jacketing material gets stripped off the bullet and will stay left behind in the head, while the rest of the bullet will continue out the skull.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Please be seated on the witness stand. Thank you, sir.
Doctor talked earlier about doing a skeletal analysis, and you mentioned a little bit there. So, do I understand that you examined the ribs and the chest area, the bones? Could you tell us about that?
Yes. After removing the tissues and examining those structures more closely, we showed that in addition to what we saw in the skull and which was seen in the photographs, there was also a defect in the right clavicle or right collarbone. There was a defect in the right second rib, which sort of sits almost just underneath the right clavicle. And those two defects, the nature of it was consistent with a bullet that probably traveled somewhat downward and from his front towards his back through the collarbone and the second rib. In addition, we found another defect on the left, the eighth rib, sort of on the outer part of the left eighth rib, that it was actually, the rib was sort of separated into two pieces. When you sort of put it back together, you could tell that there was a defect there that was consistent with a gunshot entrance wound through the outer part of the left eighth rib. In addition, the left fourth rib towards the front had two fractures not specific for a gunshot wound, but they were located near an area where on the shirt we saw a defect consistent with a bullet defect. So likely those two fractures are associated with a gunshot entrance wound somewhat towards the left front part of the chest. And lastly, as I described in the right forearm, in the radius, which is, there are two bones, the radius and the ulna, but the radius is the one that sort of connects to the thumb side of your hand. And in the radius, just above the wrist area, there was a defect in the bone there that was also a gunshot entrance wound with the bullet fragments in the soft tissue that they showed.
So, summing up, you can say for sure there was at least 5 different bullets you can confirm due to the holes in the head, the 2 bullets actually found in the body, and the fragments in the arm.
That's correct.
I noticed in your report at the very end, in your summation, you also said that additional gunshot wounds cannot be excluded. Why is that?
Again, because of the degree of decomposition of the body, the loss of the skin surfaces, which is usually our best tool for initially evaluating the presence of gunshot wounds or defects in the skin, since that's no longer there, and we're more dependent upon either bullets that we find residual within the remaining tissues, and of course the skeletal defects as well.
Also, when people are brought in, they often brought in with their personal effects, clothes still on, things like that.
Yes.
Could you tell us what personal effects or what Mr. Wright brought in?
The personal effects that he had on the remains when we examined them included a metal watch and a necklace that had 2 tags on it.
I guess it might be a little bit redundant at this point, but what was the manner of death?
The manner of death was certified as homicide.
And what was the cause of death?
Multiple gunshot wounds.
I'll pass the mic, sure.
Ms. Thomas or Mr. Perry, you may proceed.
No questions, Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Dr. Ross, thank you for being present in court today. We'll excuse you from any additional testimony on this case. Know you got to go to work. And stay safe, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Lunch should be here or is arriving shortly. Should be here. Ladies and gentlemen, your lunch should be arriving no later than 12:30. Might actually be in the building on the way to you. So we're going to stop now because it would not be appropriate to continue because your lunch should be here soon. Don't want it to be cold if it's hot. Don't want it to get mushy if it's cold. Remember the court's instruction, cannot discuss the case with anyone or amongst yourselves. And we'll resume at 1:45. Sorry, let me back up. At 1:45, in case your lunch gets here at 12:30, we'll resume at 1:45 this afternoon. I'll see you at 1:45. Thank you all. That should give you enough time to go outside, get some fresh air, maybe a better day than it was yesterday.